Maximize Business Value podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Mastery Partners, where our mission is to equip business owners to maximize business value so they can transition their business on their terms. Our mission was born from the lessons we've learned from over 100 business transactions, which fuels our desire to share our experiences and wisdom so you can succeed. Now here's your host, CEO of Mastery Partners, Tom Bronson.
Hi, this is Tom Bronson, and welcome to Maximize Business Value, a podcast for business owners who are passionate about building long-term sustainable value in their businesses. In this episode, I'd like to welcome our guest, Tom Hulsey, author of The Winning Mindset That Saved My Life. Now, this is a first edition. There's a different cover on the current edition. I first met Tom through Success North Dallas and had the privilege of hearing him speak a couple of times. Now, Tom is a cancer survivor. Now, he and I are both members of what he calls the Unfortunate Brotherhood. And so those are victims of prostate cancer. But he's also a heart attack survivor, which is why he is now a champion for men's health. Tom serves on the board of Zero Cancer, works with the Department of Defense and the Congressionally directed medical research programs, and he's president of the North Texas Prostate Cancer Coalition, a research advocate at UT Southwestern, and he was recently elected to serve on the board of the Dallas-based Mary Crowley Cancer Research. Wow. Now, their mission is to bring hope to cancer patients through innovative clinical trials while advancing treatment for patients in the future. Now, if that's not enough, he's an 11-time Ironman and 6-time Mountain Man winter triathlon finisher. I am so excited to have Tom here to talk about how this winning mindset can change your life and your business. Welcome to Maximize Business Value, Tom.
Thank you, Tom. It's an honor to be here today. I appreciate the opportunity.
Awesome. Before we talk about the cancer and the mindset, what is your background? Tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, I have multiple decades in technology, and most recently it was in security, both video surveillance, and now most recently it's been in cybersecurity, which is obviously a very hot area in today's world. But it was very much technology focused.
So awesome. You kind of grew up in the technology field, and that's something that is super important today. But why don't you give us a little backstory on surviving cancer and a heart attack?
Well, I heard the words you never want to hear on my birthday in 2015 that you have cancer. And it was, as you like to say, Tom, it was like being hit with a freight train. And there were just so many emotions that day when I heard those words. You know, I was embarrassed. I was confused. I was angry. I felt almost like I was a fraud, because people had always viewed me as being Mr. Fit and healthy, and so it was very tough, and you almost go into a fog when you hear those words. And compounding my angst was the fact that I had just witnessed one of my best friends lose his life to prostate cancer, and it was a 4-year battle, and it was absolutely gut-wrenching to watch what he went through. And at that moment, I wasn't prepared to go through that.
Wow, that is horrible. It is, and that's, we should have probably mentioned this before. You are the model of health. Of course, we have already mentioned you've done 11 Ironmen, 6 Mountain Men, and so you were always that healthy. You didn't that didn't start after you found out you had cancer, right?
This was a lifestyle I've had my entire life, and just so the viewers know, an Ironman is a 2.4-mile swim followed by a 112-mile bike ride, followed by a 26.2 marathon. and this is all in one day. So it's very grueling, and it's very it's a challenge, both not only physically but also mentally. And a lot of those traits that it takes to get through an Ironman is what helped get me through the health issues that I've encountered over the last several years.
Now, how long after your diagnosis, and of course, we're not going to get into the details of all the treatment and whatnot, but of course, you had surgery to have it robotically removed, just like I did. How long after that did you participate in another Ironman?
Well, the first thing I did was one of the friends, I was a typical guy. Like I said, I was embarrassed and I'm ashamed, and I didn't tell anybody about my diagnosis. A lot of lessons learned here, and I can talk about that later. But I suffered basically in silence, other than my family and a few close friends. But one of the friends that I did confide in took me by the shoulders and said, "Tom, you need to remember the motto of the Ironman, which is anything is possible, and you need to set goals for yourself to get beyond these dark days you're experiencing right now." And I set a short-term goal, an intermediate goal, and long-term goal. And my intermediate goal, which is probably my proudest achievement, was doing a half Ironman in Austin exactly 6 months after surgery. And then my long-term goals, I actually had two of them. One was to be able to cross the finish line at another Ironman. And then also I wanted to be around to walk my daughter down the aisle. And I achieved both of those goals in July of 16. And, with the Ironman, again, I can talk a little bit more about the parallels here in a second, but getting to the, crossing the finish line Ironman is an amazing experience. But for me, both at that half Ironman and full Ironman, the victory for me was just getting to the start line and knowing what all, everything I had been through, and it was so rewarding. And that really, that's where that mindset kicked in. And after my friend took me by the shoulders and said, you need to remember what that motto is.
I loved it. Now, we've talked about the cancer. What about the heart attack? When did this take place?
Well, 7 months after I crossed the finish line at the Ironman, I was started experiencing pains in my kind of up in my shoulder, my left shoulder, and I went to the cardiologist and complained about it. He ran the usual tests and all, and didn't show any issues and all, and he just pretty much dismissed it because he knew I had some shoulders issues in the past and rotator cuff surgery, and he attributed to that. And so I left, and I really wasn't satisfied with the answers that he was giving me, because I knew something was wrong. I was listening to my body, and I knew my body just because of my fitness level. And so I went to another cardiologist, and then he did the nuclear stress test and everything, and they showed that something was wrong. And so I ended up having a couple of stents put in my heart. Because I had 90% blockage in the main artery, what they call the widowmaker. And then I started, less than a year later, I was starting to experience the same things again. And while I was on the operating table and they were putting 3 more stents in my heart, I experienced a heart attack. And so that was actually after, kind of, I guess you could say I got through my cancer, but it was, but when the first cardiologist was looking at me, he saw this guy who had crossed the finish line at an Ironman and just saw somebody who was super fit, and he just, there's no way this guy can be having heart issues. Well, I'm here to say that was not the right diagnosis.
No kidding. My goodness. So, wow, that's sort of rapid succession. So you basically, was that 13 months after you were diagnosed with cancer, you found out that you had the heart issues and you had the stents, and
it was, yeah, pretty close to that. Uh-huh.
Wow, that's amazing, especially for somebody who is as fit and healthy as you are. And so people don't realize that you and I were talking about something before we actually started recording the podcast. And it's if you don't mind, just share with us what Dr. Cooper said regarding genetics.
Dr. Cooper, the father of aerobics, wrote the foreword for my new book, or the second edition. And he looked at me and he said, Tom, you've done everything right in your life. You know, you exercise, you eat right, you're just the picture of health and what people are supposed to do. But he said, the one thing you cannot control, though, is who your parents are. So a lot of it has to do with genetics. And again, because he said, I can't tell you to do anything different in your life, because you're doing everything you're supposed to do. So that and again, but also being in that having that high fitness level also helped me get through these challenges that I've had. And when I talk to younger people in their 20s and 30s today about it, you know, giving them advice, it says what you do to your body in your 20s and 30s will impact you the rest of your life. But if you're leading an active lifestyle, an intentional lifestyle, it will help you overcome these challenges that you might have later in life, like I did.
Yeah, the long running joke, I guess, and now I'm starting to feel it myself, is if I'd known I was going to live this long, I probably would have treated my body a little better, right? So, Tom, why did you decide to write this book? I mean, it's a great book, and the second edition even better. But why? What made you decide to write this book, The Winning Mindset That Saved My Life?
Well, that's a great question. You know, one of the first things I did after, I shouldn't say first things, but about a year after my cancer diagnosis, again, I had kept everything bottled up inside. My wife suggested, why don't you write a blog? And if you can impact one person in this world, just think how that would make you feel. Well, I wrote a blog, and my first response was from a gentleman in New Zealand. I had given him hope and inspiration, and then more responses came in, so I started writing some more blogs. But at the time, I wasn't trying to change the world, if you will, but it was just so therapeutic for me to write about it. And then people started to say, man, your story is so inspirational and impactful. You ought to write a book about it. And of course, at the time, I totally dismissed it. I said, I'm not an author, and writing a book is writing a blog is one thing, but writing a book is a whole nother animal, if you will. But I finally decided to do it. And again, the purpose of the book, or I should say, my success of the book was, if I could impact one person with my story, then that would be my definition of success. I wasn't trying to be a bestseller or anything, but again, if I could impact one person at a time in a positive way, then that would be my definition of success.
Well, I know that you've impacted many, many people with your story, but if your definition of success is impacting one person, here I am. So you know that, and so I love the picture, by the way, on the front of the book. If you're watching this, and most of our folks just listen to this podcast, but if you're watching this, you see he's holding up his bike. It looks like you're in Hawaii. Is that correct?
That's at the Ironman World Championships in Kailua Kona, Hawaii.
And if tell us the story about this photograph.
Well, the book, I like to say the book is very much a grassroots effort, and I'm self-published. I don't have an agent, and that picture was taken on a whim with my wife's cell phone camera when we were in Hawaii. So. I had no idea that picture
right now on the new edition of the book, the second edition of the book. Same pictures on the back of the book. So, but it's a great picture, and it just tells you what you need to know about Tom Hulsey's mindset. So before
and also, if I may add, Tom, I'm not trying to tell people, hey, look at me, this is what you've got to do to overcome these obstacles. But if you can just, getting off the couch and walking around the block, if that's your goal, that's great. But the thing is to be active, and there's just different degrees of it. Yeah, admittedly, I take it to an extreme, but if it can inspire and impact one person, it's great.
I love it. I love it. Now, before we take a quick break, let's talk for a second about mindset. So many people in your position would take a victim mentality. And as you've kind of already shared, and I appreciate your being vulnerable with our audience, you were sort of a victim, right? When you first got this diagnosis, you were ashamed and you were kind of reclusive about it. But so many people would take that mentality when something bad happens to them. And so in your book and in your life, you say to choose your mindset. How do you do that, and how did you make it a habit?
Well, first of all, there's I kind of have basically 5 pillars to what I call my winning mindset. But to your point, what I would call initially, I had reverted back to that fixed mindset. Woe is me. These are the cards I've been dealt, and I was, ready to give up. But I really, over time, and with the help of my friend who told me, I needed to change my thinking of all this, I moved it over to a growth mindset, if you will, or what I like to call a winning mindset, and that includes perseverance and overcoming fear, living intentionally, knowing and being prepared, and knowing your options. And those are really, the kind of the five pillars of my winning mindset. And I go into detail on these pillars, if you will, in my book.
I like that, the 5 pillars. So we'll talk a little bit more about that after the break. We are talking with Tom Hulsey. Let's take a quick break. We'll be back in 30 seconds.
Every business will eventually transition, some internally to employees and managers, and some externally to third-party buyers. Mastery Partners equips business owners to maximize business value so they can transition their businesses on their terms using our 4-step process. We start with a snapshot of where your business is today. Then we help you understand where you want to be and design a custom strategy to get you there. Next, we help you execute that strategy with the assistance of our amazing resource network. And ultimately, you'll be able to transition your business on your terms. What are you waiting for? More time? More revenue? If you want to maximize your business value, it takes time. Now is that time. Get started today by checking us out at www.masterypartners.com or email us at info@masterypartners.com to learn.
We're back with Tom Hulsey, the author of The Winning Mindset That Saved My Life. So, Tom, before the break, we started talking about mindset and your 5 pillars of mindset. My experience is that mindset is everything in business and in life. In fact, when I found out that I had cancer, the very first thing I told my family was that I am not going to die from this. And so my mindset was different now than what you first experienced. And part of it is probably because I've been around people who've had prostate cancer. Part of it is, of course, the fact that I had already read your book sometime before I found out that I had cancer, and I knew that there were some great options. So many people have commented on my mindset throughout this journey because it has absolutely been, we're at success. We're going to beat this. It's going to be in our rearview mirror soon. In fact, next week, on the podcast, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story and a little bit more about my story and a little bit more about how I keep that winning mindset. So the next chapter of your book, after you've kind of introduced the topic of mindset, is that perseverance. So why would you talk about that after you talk about mindset? What does perseverance have to do with any of this?
Well, if I may, just to kind of set the table here, Tom, I'd like to just give first of all, the dictionary definition of mindset. So we're on the same page here. But the dictionary defines mindset as a habitual or characteristic mental attitude that determines how you will interpret and respond to situations. And
I love that.
but that's the dictionary definition. And in regards to your question about perseverance, it really is a tool of the mind to keep going in spite of the circumstances and what seems reasonably possible. It's a trait that many people want to have, but have a hard time achieving. And that goes with, everything in life, because perseverance really is a life choice. And it's about keeping on going even when you don't see those immediate results. Perseverance keeps your focus forward and toward the goal, knowing that accomplishing it will provide greater satisfaction and fulfillment. And as I mentioned earlier, having short, intermediate, and long-term goals helped me persevere in my journey. And how does that really help anyone? Well, having that discipline will help you get back to healthier routines, mindsets, and relationships.
I think I hadn't really thought about it until we started talking about it here and as I was preparing for this podcast. But so many people, they'll have the right mind. They'll start out with the right mindset, winning attitude, moving forward. Attitude is everything, kind of a thing. But then they hit those obstacles, right? I mean, because there are roadblocks everywhere. The speed bumps, I call them roadblocks. And a lot of folks will, the first time they experience a roadblock, or if there are multiple roadblocks that they have to plow through, that's when they'll give up and turn the other way. And that's why I think, perseverance is so important. Too many people give up the fight right before the breakthrough, right? I mean, do you see that as well?
Absolutely. And we all have obstacles in our life, or curveballs, as I call them, and we have them on a daily basis. And some are more overwhelming than others. And I would say that cancer was right there at the top of my list. For a lot of people over the last couple of years, it's been COVID, but it's, and that's why I think persevering and seeing, at the end, what your goal is it will really help you overcome and persevere.
Absolutely. Yeah. I call it kind of no miss goals. And it's the kind of goals that you share with everybody, right? You tell them your goals. If you keep your goals to yourself, it's no good, because first of all, you want the encouragement, you want the people to hold you accountable, right? To reaching your goals and whatnot. And the funny thing is that sometimes people set goals, and I'm guilty of this myself. I'll set a goal, but I won't tell anybody about it. We let ourselves off the hook pretty easily, way more easily than somebody else if we ask them to hold us accountable to a goal. So I think,
and that was like I said, that was a mistake, or a lesson learned now that I made in the beginning, because I kept all this inside for over a year. And one of the lessons learned is cancer diagnosis or something life-threatening like that can be overwhelming, and it can also be very isolating. And lesson learned is you need to have a support group around you for whatever the challenge is, whether it's health or business or whatever. But again, if you keep it inside, and it almost did me in, again, very, very isolating.
Yeah, that's, it's funny that you say that. Even though I had the right mindset going in, and I talked to my family, I talked to all my siblings, my wife's siblings, her parents, my parents are long since gone. But and I told our close friends, but I didn't really kind of go public with it until 3 days or 2 days before my surgery. And I have to tell you that when I just published a short piece on Facebook about what I was facing and what was going to happen on Monday. And for anybody who knows me knows I just don't go to Facebook very frequently, right? I mean, it's there and I have it, but I go, once a month, twice a month, whatever. I don't spend a lot of time there. But after I made that post on Facebook, I can't even describe the overwhelming outpouring of support and friends of mine who've dealt with this before, and folks who just, for the rest of that weekend, it was perhaps one of the more uplifting times in my life where my phone rang off the hook from when I posted that on Saturday morning until I turned my phone off on Monday to go have surgery. People calling just to support me. And so build a community, right? But this also applies to business, right? You want the support to reach your goals and targets, and we'll talk about how this applies to business now. But before we let's wrap up on the book. I don't want to give away all the secrets in the book because I want our listeners to go out and buy it, and I'll tell you how to do that in just a second. But in the book, you do talk about one more concept that I want to bring up here, and that is live beyond yourself. What does that mean, Tom?
Live beyond yourself. Well, there's a quote that I've embraced in this journey, and it's one line. It's the one line that's on Jackie Robinson's tombstone, and it is, "A life is not important except on the impact it has on other lives." And for me, it's been, this has really given me a really, maybe later in life, but I really have found my purpose in life. And it's all about paying it forward and making a positive impact on other people's lives. And that's why I'm so involved with all these philanthropic organizations that are making a difference in the world. And that's really what I want, I guess, my legacy to be. All the proceeds from these books that I've authored are going back to worthy causes, and I can talk more about that in a minute. But it's not for personal gain, but it's all about paying it forward. Because again, these life-threatening illnesses have given me a wonderful perspective on life, and every day is a gift. And so.
Yes, it is, my friend. Yes, it is. So before we kind of walk down and go off on a tangent talking about some of your other men's health issues, how would you apply these lessons that you write about in the book? How would you apply those to business? Because most of our listeners are business owners. And so how would you apply these lessons to business?
Well, I like to, the comparison or analogy I like to use is to the Iron Man. Because the Iron Man is something that's been very, something that is almost my identity, if you will. And the Iron Man is a long day, and so is that lead up to getting ready for the Iron Man. But in that long day of the Iron Man, you just like in life, you have your ups and downs, and how you deal with those downs or that adversity is really what defines you. And that's the same thing in business or anything else in life. Is it's all about having that mindset that yes, failures are going to be part of that process, but that's all part of that, that having that winning mindset. And again, it can be applied to anything in life.
I agree. I agree with you. Now, before we go, this podcast is actually being released during Men's Health Month. And I know that it's a busy one for you. Tell us more about what you're doing as a men's health advocate.
Well, I use some of these events that I'm participating in as a platform to share my story and to provide awareness and education to men's health issues. Because like I said earlier, men typically don't want to talk about health issues like women do. And again, I'm trying to change that, if you will. For example, a lot of people, everybody's familiar with breast cancer, and October's being, Breast Cancer Awareness Month. Well, people don't realize that the numbers for prostate cancer are almost identical to breast cancer, but there's not a lot being done about that. And so that's what I'm trying to do. And again, June is Men's Health Month. We've got Zero and Mary Crowley have an event coming up next Thursday. It's called Swing for Hope. It's an educational event at Top Golf in Allen. We have some great sponsors, and would love for people to come out and support it. It's like I say, it's an educational event. We have some great speakers lined up, very close to Father's Day. And then also, this is also National Cancer Survivors Month. And this past
wasn't this past Sunday?
It was actually the National Cancer Survivors Day.
Yes, that was June 5th.
And I did something that was I thought pretty unique, and brought more awareness to my mission, if you will. And I competed in the Escape from Alcatraz triathlon in San Francisco. And so again, it gave me a platform. It's a very difficult race, but also and to a higher cause, I guess, if you will. I was honored. They were put at their fitness festival there at the triathlon. They gave me a booth to sell my book, and though it wasn't cancer related, all the proceeds went back to a charity in San Francisco that supports underprivileged inner city kids. And so it was just such an honor that I was able to, I'm able to make an impact on young kids that maybe don't have, aren't blessed with a great upbringing or whatever. But I'm so honored to be able to use my book and my platform to again make a positive difference.
I think that's a wonderful way to spin that, and I just think it's very admirable what you're doing. So let's wrap up our conversation about winning mindset. One last question, business question for you. The podcast is all about maximizing business value, as you know. What is the one most important thing you recommend business owners do to build value in their business?
Comes down to really one word, and that is mindset. And having that right mindset, what many people in the business world will call it a growth mindset, as opposed to that fixed mindset. So again, just very simply, having and nurturing that growth or winning mindset.
And although Tom Hulsey here talks a lot about that mindset as a cancer surviving tool, there are many, many great lessons in this book that you can apply to your business. And so I kind of thought you were going to go there with it, Tom. So, but I can't let you off the hook. Every time we do a podcast, we have to ask our bonus question. And so many of our listeners listen all the way to this point just to hear the answer to this. And I'm actually anxious to hear this myself for you. Tom, what personality trait has gotten you into the most trouble through the years?
Probably, I don't like to take no for an answer. I'm very going back to perseverance. When I want something, I go for it. And I persevere sometimes to the detriment, and my wife will tell you that too. So.
Yes, you and I kind of have the same trait there. It's unfortunate. So many people who answer that question, I identify with all these traits. And so I'm just a conglomeration of all the things that get me into big trouble. So how can our viewers and listeners get in touch with you, Tom?
Well, I've got my website, which is just my name, tomhulsey.com. It's all one word. That's the easiest way to find me. And then I'm also, the book is on Amazon. All the reviews on Amazon thus far have been 5 stars, which for me is very gratifying. Because again, going back to that positively impacting people with different, and if you read through their reviews, a lot of overcoming different challenges in their life and how it's helped them, not just cancer. So. My website, or you can find me on Amazon.
Awesome, Tom.
And also, to my website, not my website, but my email is tom@tomhulsey.com. It's the same domain name, so very simple. Love to hear from you.
Easy enough to find you. That's awesome. So, Tom, thank you for being our guest today.
My pleasure, Tom. It was such an honor, and thank you for the platform. And hope everyone has a great Men's Health Month.
Awesome. You can find Tom Hulsey at tomhulsey.com, or of course, you can find him on LinkedIn. Of course, you can reach out to me and I'll be happy to introduce you and make a warm introduction to my good friend. Now, if you'd like a copy of his book, you can find it on Amazon. Just look it up by his name, Tom Hulsey, or The Winning Mindset, and you'll find it on Amazon. But we're also going to have a link to purchase it in our newsletter this week. So if you want to go to our website, be sure to subscribe to the newsletter, because we will have a link to purchase Tom's book on our newsletter that comes out on Friday. This is the Maximize Business Value podcast, where we give practical advice to business owners on how to build long-term sustainable value in your business. Be sure to tune in each week and follow us wherever you found this podcast, and give us a comment or a suggestion for a future podcast. So until next time, I'm Tom Bronson, reminding you to choose your mindset while you maximize business value.
Thank you for tuning into the Maximize Business Value podcast with Tom Bronson. This podcast is brought to you by Mastery Partners, where our mission is to equip business owners to maximize business value so they can transition on their terms. Learn more on how to build long-term sustainable business value and get free value-building tools by visiting our website, www.masterypartners.com. That's master with a Y, masterypartners.com. Check it out.
That was perfect. I wouldn't make any changes on that.